Hey everyone, welcome to our first episode of our podcast. I'm James Barrow.
Daniel Druger.
And we are going to be trying doing this weekly where we do a rundown of all the most interesting things going on in ad tech and digital marketing. We got some really good guests that are lined up. And then we also just thought it's interesting because we're in this process right now of building our ad platform, just called Market. And a lot of the stuff that's happening kind of in the space is dictating, obviously, a lot of our product decisions. And so we thought it'd be kind of interesting to give you kind of some kind of insight into how this really rapidly changing environment is impacting how we're actually building things as well. So thank you for tuning in. Just kind of quick background on us. Both of us have been in ad tech forever. We both worked together actually at our first company, which is called Shift, which was one of the early social ads companies. We sold that in 2015. And then we both went to Snapchat, where I was in charge of building out the self-service tools and the ads API, and Daniel oversaw revenue partnerships globally. And then we didn't work together for like a year and a half when Daniel was the COO of a company called AdWolf that got acquired by Vungle. And then we started this business together. And the whole idea about this business is we're trying to make it easy for people to reach shoppers while they're shopping. And we really, really want to make it easy for direct-to-consumer brands to be able to do that as well. And so we're trying to kind of really rethink how retail media and retail media platforms are built and how they operate. So if you want to check that out, go to withmarket.com. You can follow us on Twitter, withmarkethq. And then hopefully you like this podcast and you'll like it and subscribe to it. So with that, kind of want to get into the meat of like the things that we've been talking about and thinking about. And as most people who know Daniel knows, he's extremely organized. And so he has a really good agenda. So I'm going to hand it over to Daniel to run us through it.
Thanks, James. Yeah, let's just dive right in. I think, one thing everyone, whether you're in tech or not, has been hearing over the last few weeks is kind of the generative AI models and all of the different use cases. And Google announced the other day that they're kind of the first big ads player to jump into that and give marketers a tool to actually use AI to improve campaigns, improve targeting, improve creative. I thought that was a pretty big announcement. I mean, I haven't heard anyone using it, but it kind of signals.
Yeah, it's funny because we've tried for our own platform to do something similar, and it's pretty crazy. We're building right now like a tool where you can connect to Shopify product listings, and then we'll go ahead and try to just create as many different ad formats and units around that with you basically doing nothing. So it's like it's product listing, then the mid journey. And the results that we're getting, they're wild. Like I posted on LinkedIn a picture that we created, which was just like two women wearing Market sweatshirts. Like we have a swag store and we were kind of just testing to see if we could do it there. And like, I think you'd be hard pressed. Most people would think this is real.
Yeah. If you want to check it out, you can go to James' Twitter, or you can go to withmarket.com/shop. Just look at the picture. I mean, it's two women wearing a sweatshirt that is all AI generated, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and if you go to that picture, you'll notice there's like two flaws to it that the AI just like that we have to clean it up manually. But one is the woman on the right, her hands are really small, and then the woman on the left, her hair is actually going through the hoodie. But I mean, it's pretty wild, and I think like the Google stuff, and I think Facebook also announced they're going to do something similar. I think it's going to work. I don't know. I'm kind of curious, like how the platforms, like if we were at Snapchat still, I think the question would be ad review and like how do you make sure that the AI doesn't do something totally nuts. So I think that would be interesting, but it's definitely coming. Like it's definitely out of that phase where this is fake. It's very, very real.
And I mean, I think with the move from Facebook to Advantage Plus and Google to Performance Max, I mean, creative really is kind of the last piece that brands can totally control, and that the platform's actually saying, give us more creative. And I think this is a really cost-effective, fast way to get more creative onto the platforms with small or large iterations. I mean, I'm curious to see what a lot of these existing kind of video editors and video tools and creative platforms, what they do with this, either if they embrace it or this kind of destroys their business over time.
Yeah, I think there's probably a good opportunity still for like the middlemen kind of like cross-platform creative companies. Like that feels like that's, like Google isn't going to be giving you Snap creative, So I think there's a space there, but it's definitely one that is changing fast.
Yeah. And maybe less talked about on the AI side. It's a little less exciting, probably to a lot of marketers and users, but, Reddit, Quora, a few others have started to say that, they're going to start charging AI models and companies to actually use their data to train their models. So, Reddit's got a ton of content from its users. Quora's got a ton of Q&A and great content that now they're starting to block off and saying, if you want to learn from our business, you need to pay us.
Yeah, it's interesting from like an advertising perspective, because now you can make money, obviously, as people are creating more and more content. It's going to potentially kind of mess with things around ad load. Like the incentives for someone may be now actually, let's show less ads because I can monetize the content you create by selling basically the data to these models versus like, you kind of at this point, like content creation has even more value than it used to. Like content creation was great, obviously, because it was good for the network, and it was great because you could show ads against it. But now if content creation can be sold to these models, it definitely does like add another kind of perspective to the whole thing.
Yeah. It also brings up this larger idea that, maybe ads, while there's obviously still billions and billions of dollars being poured into ads, a lot of the businesses are trying to figure out other ways to monetize. Reddit, Quora, with, as you're saying, selling that data for generative AI models, Snapchat with kind of their Snapchat Plus subscription business. Of course, Spotify's got their subscription business. A lot of these streamers with kind of both cable, subscription, and ad-supported businesses, Netflix. Kind of, what do you think? Yeah, what are your thoughts on like this new mix of ads plus other monetization models?
I think all things sort of lead to ads at the end of the day. Like there's a reason why ad-supported TV has existed for as long as it has. And, I think obviously from a margin perspective, it's like great for these businesses to get some subscription revenue. But, I don't know, if the economy softens a bit, like you're going to see ad-supported become the preferred way that people want to consume. And it is kind of ironic just because like, there's that saying, everything's an ad network, but yeah, it's also like everything's a SaaS business now, where it's like Netflix basically like what was a subscription business is now an ads business. Snapchat was an ads business. It's now a subscription business. Like I think at the end of the day, the temptation to like sling ads that are really, really high margin in these surfaces is so high. And I think users like ads when there's good targeting. Like people like Instagram ads. And I think, a lot of the Apple stuff is sort of like, at least at these large scale platforms, the Apple stuff is less of an issue. Like I've heard everyone I've talked to says Facebook is killing it again. Like it works. I don't know if you hear that same thing.
Yeah. I think for the last year, it wasn't the case. And then more recently, it sounds like they've figured it out. Maybe with the exception of this past weekend where it sounds like there were some issues with overspend.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that maybe next week as more information comes out. But I guess going back to what you were saying, it is kind of interesting that you talk about SaaS models. You could argue that ads businesses to brands is essentially a recurring software fee, right? Brands having to spend thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars every month to acquire new customers, to reach their existing customers. It's a tax that they've just come to expect.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like, I would hope it's not a tax and then instead like an investment in most cases. I know that's not the case for everything, but yeah, I think it's like, it's definitely a form of like real estate for all practical purposes, right? Like if you don't have a physical store, you have a digital store, and these are your landlords for all practical purposes, and it just happens to be rent is dynamic and can be sort of optimized in real time based on a lot of stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there was a great interview on Ad Exchanger, and then I think on D2C Supply, interviewing the CEO of True Classic T-shirt company. Really, him saying that paid social is still their biggest channel, that they're investing more and more in it. But I think talking a lot about the economics of how to evaluate performance, which over the last few years maybe that got away from a lot of folks, the platforms included, kind of driving performance as the main kind of idea of why you're advertising. But if you haven't listened to it, it's a really good interview on just a big brand growing through paid social and still truly embracing it as like that's the way they're growing, as long as it's contribution margin positive.
Yeah, we used to talk about a lot, at Snap, about like trying to build products for economically rational advertisers, and it feels like as interest rates have gone up, the economically rational part has also become a bigger part of it, which is actually kind of a good segue to what Elon Musk is just trying to do now with Twitter Blue being required for advertisers. I can't imagine this. To me, I think Elon's a genius. This is like the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And the whole purpose for any of these ad platforms is like, A, it's very expensive to acquire customers, and then B, you have to make these ad platforms work. And so to put up a tax, in this case, an actual tax basically, to get someone advertising is just, to me, so irrational. Like, it should be the total opposite. They should be handing out ad credits, and they should be setting up campaigns for you, and they should be paying you. I mean, it's shocking that they're taking this route. I have a feeling this one gets pulled back.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think over the last few months, big advertisers saying that they're pulling back spend or leaving the platform entirely. I mean, our experience was one of the most important things to do on these platforms is to get density, right? Advertiser density in there, so you can actually start to learn from that data. And he's essentially doing the opposite.
Yeah, no, and no one should feel bad for the ad platforms, but people don't talk about that the ad platforms have CAC issues as well. Like, there's a CAC to LTV ratio that like Twitter has to be thinking about. Yeah. And in this scenario, like, all they should be trying to do is make sure that there's value being delivered to the end advertiser, and this is just going to make that harder for them. So
yeah, what's kind of funny there is, a lot of times folks talk about the issue with acquiring customers is you have a leaky bottom of the bucket. I mean, this is essentially he's capping the top, right? I mean, folks aren't even coming in the door because of things like this.
Yeah, this is a weird one. But I think on the other side of people doing something pretty smart is, you sent this article to me, the Kroger-Disney partnership. I don't know if you want to kind of give context to that.
Yeah. It was a pretty interesting one where, Kroger and Disney are, Kroger in the retail media space, Disney obviously in connected TV and streaming, among a lot of other businesses, but the two of them actually partnering to use Kroger shopper data to actually provide measurement and attribution on advertisements that are run on Disney properties. They're starting with just Hulu. Very quickly can see that expanding, and they've said it to ESPN Plus, to Disney Plus, to cable, where there's user identifier, but essentially being able to create a closed loop attribution network with multiple parties. And I think what's actually really interesting, and I think, Apple has a lot to do with this based on how they've treated privacy over the last few years, is, Kroger and Disney are using LiveRamp. So they're sharing IDs in a very, very privacy safe way, using data clean rooms, making sure that there's no leakage of user data, but still be able to drive that performance for advertisers. So yeah, I don't know what you think about this, but I think it was a pretty exciting announcement. Curious to see how things turn out.
Yeah, it's cool. It's sort of funny how we're like, everyone's talking about these retail media platforms, but in a lot of ways now Kroger's becoming a measurement company in this, because the media is all, it appears as if it's all on the Disney side, which, I think it's to your point, like, it's just another step in, I think, the right direction of like how your data is going to be better protected. Like, I think the days of like the Wild West kind of are over. And I think also just like everyone talks about Apple and the impact it's had on the app ecosystem, but people aren't really talking about, the non-app space and what's going to be happening there. And I think, you're going to have a scenario where, explicit consent and the opt-out rates are going to be kind of required, and then opt-out rates are going to go through the roof kind of everywhere. And so you're going to have partnerships like this in place. And it's cool they're doing it. It's like, I don't think if you would have told me 10 years ago that like Disney and Kroger were going to be doing the innovative stuff in ads, that people would have thought that was the case.
Yeah.
So it's cool.
And I mean, I also wonder, moving the other direction in Disney and other companies that have been doing ads for so long, understand the importance of creative and different variations and different types of ad units. And, we've talked about retail media a lot, that they're product listing ads, right? If you go to Kroger.com and look at their ads, it's a product amongst other products. I'm curious to see if some of that creative, kind of creative innovation goes the other way, where Kroger starts to implement new creative elements.
Yeah, I think they will. I mean, I've seen a few on Kroger, and then I saw on Target, they're starting to have like kind of like beautiful, big display ads for products. And like those feel like a pretty obvious place where like those units can get cool, right? And like generative AI can be used there to make sure, like Target most likely has the login data. So like you could make sure that you can see someone that looks like you, or that is in, let's say if you're a family, you can make sure that, that there's family members in there. Like, I think there's a point where the creative can get a lot more personalized within these RMNs. And I think that's going to just continue to make it a performant channel, where like today, I'm not sure if it's like, I don't think most of these are like performance ad platforms quite yet.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think, something else that is I think unique to retail media, and you could argue connected TV as well, is just, I guess, how fragmented it is. That, I mean, your first business really helped big advertisers kind of build campaigns, optimize, do reporting across, 5 big social platforms. With retail media, now we're talking about potentially hundreds of different platforms. Kind of, I mean, I don't see a way in which advertisers can navigate that today in a really efficient manner.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of obviously self-serving is what we're trying to build and market. But yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to show people ads when they're buying things, right? Like, or in that moment that like seems super logical, and it makes a lot of sense to use shopper data, obviously, for optimization purposes and for measurement. I think, the social space was fragmented on the surface, but then like kind of beneath the surface, it really was Facebook and everyone else. And, I'm curious to see like what happens in this space, because like, I think there can be a ton of these retail media networks, but it may end up being that Amazon gets like 95% of the revenue still. I don't know if you think.
Yeah, I mean, one of the stats that we were looking at last week, which is mind-blowing to me, is that, Amazon was about $40 billion of ads last year. Walmart was the next closest at about $3 billion. And then you start going down the list, Target at $1 billion, Uber at $500 million reportedly. And just the gap right now it's insane. Just
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think my assumption is the gap probably, I think this is like a rising tide lifts, all ships type of thing, but like Amazon probably gets stronger over time. And like that happened with Facebook. Like you still had really interesting businesses in the form of Snapchat and Pinterest and, Twitter at one point. And I think it will be again. But yeah, I mean, Amazon's a monster in this whole thing. Now, I do think people like us and, potentially others are going to find a way to, really kind of bring together the demand, because like the supply is there, right? Like in aggregate, the rest of the market is huge. It's just going to be like, how do you onboard a ton of advertisers to do that over time? And I think that's like a pretty interesting challenge.
Yeah, I mean, especially, maybe less so Amazon, but Walmart's, Target's, the ones that have a physical retail presence. I mean, they have relationships, obviously, with a lot of big brands, some small brands for shelf space. I'm curious how native direct-to-consumer brands and digital brands that, we've seen build really strong businesses on Shopify over the last few years, how they start to enter that market. If they don't have those existing retail presence, can they, how they work with Targets, how they work with Home Depots, how they work with Ultas and so on.
Yeah, Target Plus is like a pretty good kind of playbook for it, where like, you can get your products, like a direct-to-consumer brand can get their products sold on Target digitally. That strikes me as like kind of a thing that probably we'll see more. I know obviously Walmart's doing the same thing. Basically Amazon's like entire business effectively is that I think you can't count out also just like as everything converges, like Meta, Instagram, TikTok, I do actually think Snapchat, like they all have a hand to play here. Like there's, you either are going to be like selling ads where people are shopping, or you're going to be creating shopping experiences where people are spending time. And so that's where the convergence is. Obviously, like, and like the gorilla too is just like Apple. Like when Apple decides they want to get into this space, they'll have a pretty interesting role to it. And I think, one thing we've talked about just like with Apple is like, at least on Apple devices, they basically do get to win whenever they do this, because like a measurement perspective, it's all on device. Like they're going to know. It's kind of incredible that like if they're serving ads in like a Apple shop, how performant and how good the loop could be over time.
Just talk about it. I think my takeaway is that brands and advertisers are really going to be the big winners here, that you're going to have all these, whether it's retail media, connected TV, and social players continuing to fight for attention and ad dollars. And they're going to have to prove both performance, but also be really good partners to these brands and help their businesses grow, because now brands have so many different options to go to.
Yeah. And I think it's good for a lot of things are moving the way that like a lot of tech we've built in the past, where like, I think you're going to find every platform is going to be a DR platform. Like everything, I think like the days of ad platform themselves, not sitting here and hyper-focusing on how they can provide direct value to the brand, like those days are over. I think you're going to find that like all that matters is, can I actually help you, turn $1 into more than $1? And I think the mix of like, I think it's actually going to be really doable. And I think all the AI stuff is going to make a huge impact. So it's going to be cool to see. And I think it'll happen faster than people think. Daniel, thank you for doing this with me today, and for coming up with this idea and for organizing it. And
thanks to anyone who's listening to this. So follow us on Twitter at WithMarketHQ. Drop in comments, drop in the DMs, and then make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast. We'll be back next week with a new episode and a whole host of new topics.
Awesome. Thank you for listening.